A client approached me about repairing this rotten old window frame, and she said, "Can you add a bit of filler to it?" And I said, "No, let me show you how bad it is." So I offered to make a hardwood frame from scratch for about 500 quid, which is a little bit too little to be honest, but I was quite excited about making some joinery. So as you can see, this Moranti isn't exactly very square, and it's got a bit of a twist in it, as you can see, using these winding sticks. So I just need to take off these high spots from each corner, and to do that I'll be using a jointer plane. I'm making a few passes down the length of the stock just to get that nice and flat across the length. And once I'm happy with that, I will make a couple of passes diagonally across those two high corners, and that will take the twist out. This process only took me about 5 minutes. No expensive machinery is needed, just skill, and skill costs nothing. It's such an important investment. Spend time honing these traditional skills. So there you have it, 5 minutes, and we've got a twist-free piece of timber, and the straight edge doesn't show any light underneath it, so it's completely flat. You can also use the hand plane as well to check that. And then we just mark off the face side, and that's where we will reference all those measurements from the original frame onto the new one. Now, for every project I like to make a drawing because it records all the details that I need, and I can just quickly glance at this drawing to refresh my memory on all the details. It's even just things like the orientation of the joinery is really helpful. So now I need to rip the stock down to thickness, and to do that I'm going to use a table saw. Usually you use a thicknesser, which is a specific kind of planing machine, but a table saw can do it as well if you make the right kind of jigs. So this is a featherboard jig which is going to hold the stock for me and allow me to make a long rip cut without putting my hand anywhere near that spinning blade. And so there you can see it grips the stock, pushes it against the fence, and it means that I actually only need to use one hand to push that through. Now all the stock is consistent width and thickness, and it's completely flat and square. So I can now start marking up the joinery using different marking gauges. I also need to mark out where I'm going to rebate the timber. This is the housing for the glazing. So once that's all marked up, I can actually start making the cuts for the joinery now. So we're making an upright cut using a table saw, which is not usually very safe. That spinning blade can actually propel the workpiece back at my face very easily. So I've made an upright jig here, which will support the length of the piece. Once done, all those joints slot together very nicely, and everything is parallel as well. Now I'm going to use a trim router to cut the glazing rebates, and a trim router is really not powerful enough to do this kind of cutting. It's good for MDF and very thin, like sort of trim really, but my larger router exploded into bits, so I have to make do with this. In order to not knacker out the motor of this router, I'm going to have to make lots of smaller passes, which makes this job much more tedious than it should be. Now I just need to remove this part of the tenon because it's holding off the other part of the joint. I also added a 45-degree lap joint, which will prevent water ingress from the outside of the frame. There's always a little bit of refinement left. Here I'm using a bastard file just to clean up the joints, and then a small chisel just to hollow out that bed of the mortise so that the joints really squeeze together very, very tightly. So I hadn't really thought this through. I'd bought 40mm stock, and actually I hadn't bothered to measure the bottom rail of the window, which is 60mm. So I have to make up another 20mm by jointing a piece of wood onto the bottom of the frame. But this is fine. I can use a tongue and groove joint, and that will then link the two pieces together and also lock them together in a way that will stop them deflecting or warping or splitting apart. So this is quite nice, fine joinery, which I don't often get to do, so I really enjoyed this part. So a really nice little bit of joinery here with some delicate mortises being cut in. You can see how that all slots together now. And once this is planed and glued, you won't see any of these joints. Now I just need to disassemble the old frame and take out the glass so that I can test it in the new frame and see if it fits. Now that that tense ordeal is over, I can now start to glue this frame up. I'm using a polyurethane glue which expands into those joints. It's completely waterproof. The glass fits, all the joints are ready, so this is actually quite a satisfying part. Here's how that bottom rail is looking, where I laminated a piece on there using a tongue and groove joint. Actually, I was really impressed. You can't even see the join line on here. After glue up, a little bit of twist had been introduced in the frame, so I just plane off on opposite corners, and that will take the twist out so it doesn't rock anymore. Now this window has a storm flap, which means that the inside face is rebated, and it has a mitre on it as well at 10 degrees. So I now need to make that 10-degree mitre cut all round on all four sides. And I'm going to be using my favourite Festool TS55, which is the original track saw, and this is a really good tool for these kind of cuts. Something I really dislike about woodworking is sanding, and the beauty of a hand plane is that you don't really need to do any sanding because you're basically slicing the fibres of the wood. It gives a much smoother finish than if you spent many hours sanding it with a piece of paper. So now I can go ahead and paint this. Before I went ahead and painted this, I thought I should check whether it fits well into the aperture. So I just popped round to the client to check, and it was a perfect fit. So here's how the window is looking once it's painted and glazed. Painting isn't very interesting to show, so I just will show how I glazed it using some linseed oil putty. First of all, you fill out the rebate with the putty, and then you can squeeze in the glazing on top of that. The putty takes about 20 days to harden fully, but after about 7 days you can paint it. And while that putty is drying, it's a good idea to pin the glass in place so it doesn't drop out. And you can use a pin hammer for this. And on a normal pin hammer, you have a flat wedge on one end, and it's for these kind of purposes. Once the glass is in, you add a bead of putty around the outside and paint. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to subscribe, you can see more updates and videos from me in the future. Cheers.